Genesis, the story you know, is only half of what Moses received. The rest was sealed upon a higher mountain, written not on stone, but on what the angels call the tablets of heaven. I speak not as a skeptic, but as one who has walked in the trance of revelation, where the soul leaves the body and stands before truth. In that place, I saw the second revelation. I saw the moment when Moses stood amid thunder and cloud, and another voice, not the same, that gave him the law spoke from the deeper fire. It was not for the crowd at the mountain's foot. It was for the few who could endure the weight of divine memory. Moses trembled. His hands burned with unseen fire. He saw not 10 laws, but entire worlds unfolding, patterns of time before the sun, laws of creation before the earth cooled. And that was the secret he carried down the mountain, silent behind his eyes, hidden beneath the ordinary commandments. He could not tell them then. They were not ready. He gave them bread, but he had tasted the seed. He gave them law, but he had seen design. In my vision, the angels stood beside him, not radiant in beauty as men imagine, but dreadful in their stillness. They revealed to him what was, what is, and what would be the descent of light into matter, the rebellion of spirits who chose desire over harmony, and the long trial of humanity that would follow. I understood then. Genesis was only the doorway, not the dwelling. The book of Jubilees was the key left hidden in plain sight. I saw how the first revelation was made, public commandments written in stone, a law for nations, a covenant of obedience. But the second revelation was the whisper of eternity, dictating not what to do, but how existence itself was formed. It spoke of the cycles of light and darkness, of how souls enter flesh, of how every motion of heaven mirrors an action on earth. The angel said to Moses, "This will not be spoken aloud. Write it upon your heart." He obeyed, yet centuries later someone dared to write it down, and that, I learned, was how the book of Jubilees was born, a record of the vision that could not die. It told of 2 revelations, the known and the hidden, the outer and the inner, the commandment and the secret. It explained why demons were allowed to remain after the flood, why some angels fell while others stood, and what language Adam spoke when the world was still innocent. Every mystery that Genesis left unanswered, Jubilees whispered in the night. When I read its words in trance, they pulsed like living fire. There are 2 histories, the voice said, the history of men and the history of heaven. One begins with dust, the other begins with light. Moses saw both. He was given sight of the war between the sons of heaven and the children of the earth, of how desire pulls spirit downward, and how discipline draws it back to the source. That truth frightened priests and kings alike, for it meant revelation was not finished. It still continues through those who listen. The mountain where he stood was not Sinai as we picture it, but a symbol, the place where matter meets eternity. I have walked that mountain in my own visions. It rises not from earth, but from within the self, from the silence between 2 breaths. There the 2 voices still speak. One commands, "Do this." The other reveals, "This is why it was written." Few ever hear the second. Fewer still can bear it. The hidden revelation explained what the outer story could not. That creation is layered, that behind every visible act lies an invisible law. The light God called forth on the first day was not sunlight, it was consciousness. From that consciousness the angels were born. From their service the cosmos took shape. But among them was one who chose to mirror instead of serve, to reflect light rather than transmit it. Thus fell pride, thus began duality, thus entered death. This was the truth Moses received when the cloud covered the mountain for 40 days. It was not only a meeting between God and man, but between eternity and time. The first revelation gave the moral law. The second gave the cosmic order. One built nations, the other built universes, yet only one was allowed to be spoken. The rest was sealed until the time when humanity would hunger again for the hidden manna, when faith would seek not only to believe, but to understand. And now, that hunger has returned. The book of Jubilees rises from the dust of ages, as prophecy said it would. It comes not to replace the Bible, but to illuminate its shadow. It reveals the architecture beneath belief, the science beneath spirit. I tell you, when I beheld these things, I felt the pulse of the same fire that touched Moses' face. Knowledge is sacred, but secrecy is mercy. The heavens hide nothing out of pride, but to protect those not yet ready to see. In this first unveiling, remember this truth. There are two revelations in every life, the one you read and the one you live. The written law teaches the hand. The hidden law awakens the soul. Moses knew both. The book of Jubilees merely reminds us that heaven still speaks in two voices, one thunder, one whisper. And if you learn to hear the whisper, you will understand what Genesis began but never finished. I saw the man who dared to write what angels had forbidden to speak. He was not a prophet crowned in glory, but a trembling scribe hidden in the dark corners of Jerusalem. The city was divided. Greek theaters glowed with torches and laughter. Jewish priests prayed under fading lamps. The air was thick with confusion, a war between heaven's memory and the world's new philosophies. And in the middle of that storm, he sat alone, his hands shaking over parchment, his heart burning with revelation. He was not writing his own words. He was writing what he claimed had come from Moses himself, from the secret revelation buried in silence for centuries. His lamp flickered. The smell of burning oil mixed with fear. Outside, soldiers' boots echoed on stone. The empire had conquered Israel, but could not conquer the soul that still heard heaven's whisper. The scribe dipped his pen into ink, black as midnight. He whispered to himself, two revelations, not one. Then he began to write the story that would divide believers for generations. He wrote about the mountain where fire spoke, about how Moses had seen not only the finger of God carving commandments, but the breath of angels inscribing the laws of eternity. He wrote that Moses received two tablets, one made of stone, one made of light. The stone was for Israel, the light was for creation itself. The stone gave law, the light gave understanding. The priests taught the first, the prophets guarded the second. But this man, centuries later, claimed both belonged to the same truth. He knew the danger. To write what was meant to stay hidden was to challenge the temple itself. He wrote with the swiftness of one racing against destiny. Each letter was rebellion. Each sentence, a wound against tradition. He wrote about angels that existed before stars, about watchers who saw beauty and fell into desire, about the secret reason demons still roam after the flood. He wrote of the forbidden name of the archangel who revealed these mysteries to Moses. He trembled, for he knew what these words would cost. Outside his door, temple guards passed like shadows. The priests would call him heretic. The philosophers would call him mad. The truth burns, and those chosen to hold it cannot rest. He kept writing. Sweat ran down his face, ink spilled like blood. They will destroy this, he whispered, but perhaps one copy will survive. And so he continued, driven by a force stronger than fear. In my trance, I saw him writing by night, hiding the scroll by dawn. He was not alone. There were others who guarded fragments of the same vision, voices scattered through time, all speaking of two revelations. They believed creation itself longed to be remembered. The scribe knew this was more than history. It was memory from before the fall. Each word he wrote reawakened what humanity had forgotten. He wrote that when Moses stood on the mountain, he was shown the first day of creation and the spirits born in that light. He saw how rebellion began, how shadow entered existence, and how divine law was woven to keep chaos from consuming form. The scribe understood. This was not myth. It was code, a language between heaven and matter. The priests of his day had reduced the law to ritual, but he saw it as architecture. Every commandment was a beam holding reality together. Break one, and something unseen trembles. The scribe did not claim authorship. He hid behind the name of Moses, saying, "These are his true words." But in spirit I knew it was revelation, continuing through another vessel. The same current that once spoke to prophets now moved through an unknown man. That is how heaven works. When the world forgets, it chooses another voice. When dawn came, he sealed the scroll with wax and buried it among sacred writings. His hands shook not from exhaustion, but from awe. He knew he had given birth to a forbidden child, one that would outlive kingdoms. The Book of Jubilees, he called it, a record of what Moses saw in secret. It was both memory and prophecy, both history and warning. He knew generations would fight over it. Some would burn it. Others would protect it. But truth cannot be destroyed. It sleeps. It waits. And I, seeing him across the centuries, understood that he was not alone in his madness. Every soul called to reveal divine knowledge walks that same path between revelation and ruin, between obedience and fire. The scribes of light always write in fear, for they know their words are dangerous. But heaven demands it. Light must find its voice again, even when the world would rather stay blind. That is how every sacred book is born, from trembling hands, from forbidden ink, from a heart that fears God more than death. He wrote of beginnings older than creation itself, and as I beheld the vision, I understood what he meant. The book of Jubilees did not start with man, nor even with earth, but with the light before light, the first vibration that shaped the unseen. In that silence before the first dawn, I saw the angels formed, not as later myths would paint them, but as pure intelligences, waves of awareness flowing out from the eternal mind. 4 orders they were, each radiant with purpose: the angels of the presence who stood nearest the throne, bearing the pulse of divine will; the angels of sanctification, who guarded the purity of the cosmos; the angels of the elements, who governed fire, wind, and sea; and the guardian spirits, bound to every living soul that would one day breathe. They were the architecture of order. They were the unseen framework of all becoming. And yet, even in heaven, freedom was a seed that could blossom into rebellion. Among them was one whose brightness rivaled morning, Samyaza. I saw his gaze turn downward toward the still-forming world. The angels watched the rise of flesh, the beauty of woman, the innocence of those newly formed from dust. Desire entered what had never known desire. It was the first fracture in the crystal harmony of heaven. 200 followed him, watchers of the lower realms, who swore an oath upon Mount Hermon to take for themselves what was not given. They fell like meteors, burning through the firmament, crossing the barrier between immortal and mortal. And when they touched the earth, the soil itself trembled. Their union with humankind gave birth to a race that should never have existed. Giants, beings of both light and clay, strength without mercy, hunger without limit. I saw them devour the fruits of the fields, then the flocks, and at last the flesh of men. Blood darkened the rivers. The earth cried out in agony. The angels who remained in heaven turned their faces away, for creation itself had become corrupted. The knowledge those fallen ones carried spread like poison. They taught the forging of weapons, the reading of stars, the crafting of charms, the seduction of power. And so humanity, once clothed in innocence, clothed itself in violence. I saw Noah's age unfold as a wound upon the earth. I saw the waters rise, and the towers of men vanish beneath them. The giants drowned, their bodies broken, their voices lost beneath the waves. Yet the book of Jubilees revealed what Genesis left untold. Their spirits did not die. Their bodies returned to dust, but their consciousness lingered twisted, bitter, unredeemed. They became the wandering shadows that plague the minds of men. They became the demons that whisper in the night. They became the tempters who feed upon despair. As I watched, the vision turned darker. I saw the leader of these spirits, Mastema, approach the throne. He bowed, but his eyes still burned with pride. He pleaded with the Eternal, saying, "Do not destroy all, for without the adversary the children of dust will forget their need for light. Let 1/10 remain, to test them, to separate the faithful from the fallen." And the voice of the Almighty, terrible and calm, replied, "So it shall be, for the measure of the soul is known only in trial." And so, by divine decree, evil was not erased, but permitted. I understood then that the world's suffering is not chaos, but crucible. The demons that torment are also the mirrors that reveal what we have yet to conquer within ourselves. Heaven did not abandon the world to darkness. It allowed the shadow to sharpen the light. This was the revelation the scribe had written in trembling ink. Not the end of good, but its refinement. Not a curse, but a test. The waters subsided. The ark rested upon the mountains. Life began again, but never as before. The air was heavy with the memory of judgment. The soil remembered blood. Even the stars seemed to carry the sorrow of that cleansing. Humanity walked the earth with new fear. aware that heaven watches, that sin echoes, that no deed dies unseen. In trance, I saw how the angels recorded each act upon heavenly tablets, those luminous records that existed before the foundations of the world. Every birth, every thought, every secret rebellion was inscribed there. This was the second revelation given to Moses, that nothing in creation is lost. Every soul carries the trace of its choices into eternity. Even the watchers, even their monstrous children, remain bound by the record of divine law. The scribe who preserved this truth wrote not to glorify terror, but to reveal design. The flood was not wrath without reason. It was correction, the restoring of rhythm. Yet the wound of rebellion remains in every generation. It whispers through ambition, through envy, through the lust for forbidden power. And so the battle continues, unseen but unending, between what was born of light and what was born of desire. I have felt that war within myself. When the visions come, I feel both currents moving through me, the angel that serves and the watcher that remembers. Both are part of the same creation, but only one leads home. That is why the story matters. It is not about ancient giants. It is about the giants we carry inside, the hungers we must drown, the pride we must release. The book of Jubilees tells it not as myth, but as warning. The same choice that broke heaven now beats in the heart of man. As I left that vision, the words still burned within me. The flood may have cleansed the earth, but not the soul. And the same voice that once allowed 1/10 of darkness still speaks through conscience, asking each of us the same question. It once asked the angels, will you serve the light, or will you fall for the shadow that looks like love? There was a language before Babel, before confusion and division scattered the sound of heaven into fragments. It was not a human invention, nor born of the lips of angels. It was the sound of creation itself, when the Eternal spoke, saying, let there be light. Those words were not sound as you know it. They were power made audible, vibration turned into form, thought-shaping substance. That was Hebrew, the tongue of heaven, the language that carried the pulse of divine consciousness into matter. Every word was seed. Every syllable carried weight. Every letter burned with purpose. It was not written. It existed, like light, before the beginning. Adam heard it before he opened his eyes. When the breath of God entered him, it entered as word. And the first thought that awakened in him was not his own. It was the echo of that same heavenly language, still flowing through him. When he spoke to Eve, when he named the animals, when he called the Creator Lord, he spoke in the sacred tongue that heaven itself had taught him. The lion understood. The eagle answered. Even the serpent, before the fall, spoke in that same vibration. In Eden, communication was not translation, it was communion. Thought moved as sound, sound as light, light as life. Nothing was hidden. No creature was mute. Every word sang with truth. Then came the fracture. Sin did not begin with rebellion, it began with distortion. The serpent used the same sacred tongue, but twisted its tone, changing vibration into deception. The words were still Hebrew, but the intention was corrupted. That is the mystery of evil. It uses the language of heaven to speak the will of separation. When Adam and Eve fell, silence followed. The trees no longer answered. The beasts no longer spoke. The tongue that once united all life was withdrawn. Humanity still carried memory of it, but as an echo fading across centuries, Hebrew remained the ghost of Eden's sound, a divine frequency clothed in human speech. After the fall, that language passed from father to son, guarded as a secret flame. Enoch used it when he spoke with the angels. Noah uttered it when he sealed the ark's covenant. His commands to the animals were not orders, but harmonies. They obeyed because they recognized the original voice that once named them. When the waters fell, the language survived, carried inside Noah's heart like a song waiting to be remembered. For a time, humanity spoke as one. They built, they sang, they prayed in that ancient tongue, believing it could lift them back to heaven. Then came Babel. The tower rose not from faith, but from pride. They used the sacred language to reach the throne of God, believing that knowledge alone could replace obedience. So the Eternal scattered the words, breaking the single sound into 1,000 dissonances. Each tribe received a fragment, each nation a shadow. That is how confusion entered the world. Not because speech was multiplied, but because meaning was lost. The voice that once united all hearts became divided. Heaven withdrew its tongue, and man began to argue about what truth meant. Centuries passed, empires rose and fell. The divine language slept beneath layers of symbols and idols, yet heaven never forgets what it creates. There came a moment, recorded in the book of Jubilees, when the sacred tongue was awakened again. The angels descended not to deliver law, but to restore memory. They came to Abraham. He was not chosen for wealth nor for wisdom, but because his spirit remembered the vibration of Eden. The messengers opened his mouth and placed the sound of heaven upon his tongue. Letter by letter, word by word, they reconnected him to the current of creation. That is why his prayers carried such force. He spoke not to God, but with God, in the same resonance that shaped the stars. The angels told him, "Guard this language. It is the key to covenant. It is the bridge between worlds." Through Hebrew, Abraham received the promises that became nations. Through that same language, his descendants would call upon the Eternal and receive answer. Every letter was energy. Every name carried destiny. When Moses would later stand on Sinai, he did not invent law. He translated divine vibration into human form. The commandments were sound turned into word, word turned into law. The book of Jubilees revealed what many feared to believe. That language itself is the structure of creation. God did not simply speak the world. He sustained it by his continual speaking. Each word uttered by the divine became law for existence. To sin was not merely moral failure, but dissonance against that living word. To pray was not only devotion, but alignment with the rhythm of heaven. The Hebrew tongue, in its purest form, was not cultural. It was cosmic. It was the DNA of creation written in sound. When the prophets spoke, they were not inventing prophecy. They were resonating with the same frequency that spoke in the beginning. When the psalmist sang, his voice stirred the same light that moved through Eden. The ancients believed every Hebrew letter carried a creative power. Aleph for beginning, Mem for water, Shin for fire. Words were not mere symbols, they were instruments that could summon reality. That is why blessings shaped generations and curses endured beyond death. Every utterance returned to its source, shaping the invisible fabric of the world. The scribes who preserved this truth knew that the secret of faith is not belief, it is vibration. Heaven responds to sound that matches its nature. That is why some prayers are heard instantly and others fall silent. The power lies not in volume, but in alignment. The book of Jubilees called it the speech of angels. It was the sound that keeps creation alive. When humanity forgot this, it forgot how to speak truth itself. And yet, the language did not die. It waited in silence like a seed beneath winter soil. In the fullness of time, the word became flesh, and the sound of heaven spoke again through human breath. That moment was not new creation, it was restoration. The word that formed the universe returned to remind mankind of its origin. What was lost at Babel was found in the heart of the Son. Thus, the mystery remains. Words still carry creation's power. When you speak in truth, you echo the first command, "Let there be light." When you lie, you echo the serpent. Every voice is a thread in the same eternal sound. The book of Jubilees does not ask you to learn ancient grammar. It calls you to remember the resonance of heaven, the language of the soul before sin, when every creature spoke peace. For one day, when the veil is lifted and all tongues return to one harmony, the first word ever spoken will be heard again, not as command, but as invitation. Come home to the light. The same voice that spoke creation into being also spoke the law, and the book of Jubilees declared that law was older than Moses, older than Abraham, older even than the stars. It was not written for a nation, but woven into the structure of existence itself. When the Eternal spoke, he did not create rules, he created rhythm. The law was not instruction, it was balance. To obey was to stay in tune with the vibration of heaven. To rebel was to tear at the harmony that keeps the universe alive. Before Sinai, before Egypt, the law was already living. Adam kept the Sabbath not as command, but as instinct. The seventh day was rest, because creation itself rested. The rhythm of seven was the heartbeat of the world, the pause that renews all things. When Adam ceased his labor, the earth breathed with him. When he broke that rhythm, decay entered matter. Even before sin, time itself carried the mark of the sacred interval. Jubilees wrote, "He who rests with the Creator becomes one with the light." That was not religion. It was reality. Noah knew the difference between clean and unclean long before Leviticus was ever written. It was not ritual, but resonance. Certain flesh carried harmony, others carried disorder. To eat wrongly was to invite chaos into the body. To eat purely was to align with the divine pattern. In those days, to live was to remember the original vibration that sustained life. Noah kept the covenant of order through obedience to the unseen frequencies that shaped his world. Abraham, too, followed laws not yet given. He celebrated feasts before Israel was born. He practiced circumcision before Sinai. These were not traditions. They were memories passed from spirit to spirit since the garden. When the angel spoke to him, it said, "This covenant is eternal. It existed before you and will remain after all generations." Abraham understood that the mark in flesh was a symbol of a deeper truth, the cutting away of what resists divine flow. That act aligned his seed with creation's rhythm, marking his bloodline as guardians of heavenly order. The book of Jubilees revealed what many forgot, that sin is not the breaking of a rule, but the breaking of design. Every act of disobedience distorts creation's architecture. To ignore the Sabbath is to rupture the pattern of rest built into time. To consume what is unclean is to ingest confusion into the vessel of the soul. To reject covenant is to cut oneself from the current that sustains life. Sin, in this view, is not moral failure, it is spiritual entropy. It unravels the threads that bind light to form. That is why the ancient sages feared lawlessness more than punishment. To them, the penalty of sin was not fire, it was disintegration. A soul out of alignment decays until nothing holds it together. The righteous are whole because they vibrate with the Creator's own breath. The wicked crumble because they have separated from it. The book of Jubilees warned that when man forgets the law, the universe itself groans. Seasons falter, time trembles, even the stars lose harmony. For all creation is bound to the same covenant. This knowledge made the law sacred beyond measure, but also dangerous. For once man learned that his actions shaped the cosmos, obedience became more than duty, it became power. To walk in harmony was to command angels, to transgress was to strengthen demons. The scribes of old knew this, which is why they feared to teach it openly. They said the mysteries of law could bend light, open the heavens, or call down judgment. The priests guarded these truths, but the book of Jubilees revealed them again, saying, "The commandments are the pillars of the world, and by them all things stand." When Moses stood upon the mountain, he was not given new laws. He was reminded of the eternal ones. The angel said, "These are not decrees, they are foundations. Speak them, that man may remember what his soul already knows." That is why the 10 Commandments carry a strange familiarity to every human heart. They are not foreign, they are recognition. Somewhere within, the soul remembers the order it was made for. That memory is the voice of God echoing through the conscience. In every generation, prophets rose to remind the people of this truth, but most would not listen. They wanted law as ritual, not revelation. They wanted to perform, not to align. And so the law became burden instead of blessing. Yet the book of Jubilees never saw it as chains. It saw it as the divine geometry of freedom. To live in harmony with creation's law is to move without resistance, to breathe in rhythm with eternity. That is why those who keep it find peace even amid chaos. They are tuned to heaven's song. Thus the book declared, "Break the law, and you break yourself." It was not threat but fact. To live outside divine pattern is to lose coherence. To obey is to become whole. The scribe who preserved this mystery did not write of rules, he wrote of resonance. He understood that holiness is not perfection but alignment. Those who walk with the Creator move as light through air, effortless, constant, unseen, yet unstoppable. The law of heaven is not constraint. It is motion without friction. It is the song of existence sung without error, and those who remember it become part of the melody that sustains the worlds. The law was eternal, but men lost their rhythm with heaven when they began to measure time by their own eyes instead of the light God set in the sky. The book of Jubilees revealed that even the calendar had been corrupted, that the very flow of days had been altered by human hands. It declared that the true order of time was not lunar, but solar, a perfect circle of 364 days, divided into 4 equal seasons, 13 weeks each, all balanced within the harmony of creation. The moon, though beautiful, was never meant to rule time, for it changes, it wanes, it deceives. But the sun, constant and faithful, marks the pattern written on heaven's tablets. To follow the moon was to follow confusion. To follow the sun was to remain in step with eternity. The priests of Jerusalem, bound by tradition, followed the moon. They watched for its crescent, arguing over the sighting of its first sliver of light, deciding holy days by human judgment. But those who read Jubilees saw another truth. They believed the calendar was not invention but revelation, that the days themselves carried divine intention. Each season began on the same day forever. Each feast fell upon the same appointed time without need for calculation. The law of time was fixed, not shifting. The heavens did not debate when to shine. Only men did. When this truth emerged, it tore Israel apart. Imagine a people with one God but 2 clocks, one nation divided not by belief, but by day and hour. Some prepared Passover while others still labored. Some rested in Sabbath while others plowed. The temple in Jerusalem rang with prayers that heaven no longer heard, for the time of those prayers was wrong. The priests declared heresy, saying, "We have followed Moses." But the keepers of the solar calendar replied, "You have followed the shadow of the moon." Each side claimed divine authority. Each side accused the other of rebellion. Time itself became a weapon. Those who followed the solar law fled the city. They sought refuge in the wilderness, near the waters of the Dead Sea, building a community called Qumran. There, they lived apart, guarding the ancient order of time. They rose and slept by the movement of the sun, not the phases of the moon. They kept their Sabbaths unchanging, their feasts eternal. In their minds, they were the true Israel, the faithful remnant who still walked according to the pattern set before creation. They copied the book of Jubilees onto scrolls and buried them in jars, knowing that one day the truth would be uncovered again. And it was. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, the same words appeared proof that another rhythm had always existed, hidden beneath the noise of human calendars. The difference was more than mathematics, it was spiritual. The lunar calendar required human observation. It depended on witnesses, judges, debates, and the unreliable eyes of men. But the solar calendar needed no priest to determine holiness. It was written in the sky by the hand of God himself. Every sunrise was revelation. Every equinox, covenant. The moon changed with mood and weather, but the sun never lied. In that constancy, the faithful saw the image of the eternal. To follow the solar law was to surrender control. No man could manipulate the seasons or decide holy time for convenience. The pattern ruled them, not they the pattern. The priests hated this, for power hides in interpretation. When the calendar depends on human sight, the priest decides what day is holy. But when the calendar is fixed by heaven, authority returns to God alone. That was the silent revolution of Jubilees. It stripped the temple of its monopoly on time. It declared that God's order needs no witness, no permission, no earthly mediator. The book of Jubilees said the calendar of the sun was given to Moses alongside the law. It was part of the second revelation, the one hidden from the multitude. The people were given the moon because they were not ready for perfection. The solar calendar was reserved for the wise, for those who could walk in the rhythm of eternity. To live by it was to live in harmony with angels, for they too moved by that same order. To them, each day was already known, each season already sanctified. There was no guessing, no confusion, only pure obedience to divine sequence. The argument over calendars was not small. It shaped centuries. It determined when the Passover lamb would be slain, when the Day of Atonement would begin, when the year of Jubilee would arrive. To follow the wrong day was to perform holy acts outside the appointed hour, and that meant separation from the divine rhythm. The book warned that prayers uttered on the wrong day were like songs played out of tune, lost to heaven's harmony. Thus, time itself became the measure of righteousness. In the wilderness, the keepers of the solar law watched the sky and felt peace. The city priests watched the moon and felt power. The world outside carried on in ignorance, not knowing that even the flow of time could be corrupted. Yet the book of Jubilees taught that redemption would come when mankind returned to the right count of days. When the 364-day cycle was restored, when the 4 seasons aligned again, creation itself would rest. For time was not just a record, it was a covenant. The meaning is clear. Those who live out of sync with the divine rhythm exhaust themselves chasing shadows. Those who align with the eternal calendar move effortlessly within the current of God's will. One measures time by change, the other measures it by constancy. The sun does not seek approval to rise, it obeys. So too should the soul that remembers its true clock. For in every age, truth keeps its own time, waiting for men to return to the hour appointed before the beginning. And so, the book of Jubilees stood as both warning and prophecy. It told of days that would no longer align, of feasts forgotten, of worship made hollow because it was untuned to the pulse of heaven. But it also promised restoration, that one day the children of light would again walk in harmony with the eternal sun, when no moon would darken their sight and no priest would govern their time. Then creation would breathe again in rhythm with its maker, and every heartbeat would mark the perfect day of God. The division of calendars was only the beginning, for every revelation that exposes truth threatens the order built upon blindness. The book of Jubilees did more than alter time, it shattered authority. Its words reached the early centuries when the apostles walked among nations, and its echo stirred unease within the newborn church. The followers of Christ preached grace, freedom from the law, salvation through faith alone. Yet the book of Jubilees spoke of eternal law, unbroken and unending, written before the stars were born. It claimed that obedience was not abolished, but woven into the soul of creation itself. To the apostles, this was dangerous. To the priests of Rome, it was intolerable. For how could they preach liberation from the law when another book declared the law to be the foundation of reality? Paul stood before Greeks and Romans proclaiming that Christ had fulfilled the law, that circumcision and dietary customs no longer bound the faithful. But the book of Jubilees whispered a different song, one older, sharper, more absolute. It declared that Abraham's covenant was everlasting, that every mark in flesh, every ritual of purity, every Sabbath day was written on heavenly tablets. It said that the law was not temporary discipline, but cosmic necessity. The church faced a paradox. If Jubilees were true, grace was rebellion. If grace was true, then Jubilees was heresy. This conflict was not mere theology. It was war for the soul of faith. The apostles spoke to Gentiles, preaching that all nations were invited to redemption, but Jubilees condemned the mingling of bloodlines, cursing every union between Israel and the nations. It ordered fire for those who mixed the holy with the profane. How could they preach love for all creation while holding a book that demanded the burning of strangers? The early church trembled before this contradiction. They saw the danger not of lies, but of truth, too rigid to bend. The book of Jubilees also magnified the role of angels. It told how every law came not directly from the eternal, but through messengers who guarded the heavenly tablets. It spoke of watchers, recorders, and sanctifiers, each guiding the order of the universe. Yet the apostles preached one mediator, Christ alone. To teach angels again would confuse new converts, turning them from the living word to ancient hierarchies of celestial bureaucracy. Paul wrote to silence these voices, warning against those who worshipped angels, for he knew what their source was. He knew they came from this book, this dangerous memory of divine administration older than his gospel. The leaders of the church saw clearly what must be done. They could not destroy the book of Jubilees outright. It was too widespread, too sacred among ancient Jews, too woven into Ethiopian and Eastern traditions. But they could silence it. When the councils gathered to decide which writings would become scripture, Jubilees was not debated. It was ignored. It vanished not by fire, but by silence. This was the most subtle exorcism, the banishment of a revelation through forgetting. And yet, forgetting does not erase truth. It only drives it underground. Copies survived in the sands of Ethiopia and the caves of Qumran. Among the Ethiopian Christians, the Book of Jubilees was not forbidden, it was beloved. They read it beside Genesis, believing it completed what the Western canon had left unfinished. To them, there was no conflict between law and grace, for they saw both as parts of the same breath. The law taught alignment. Grace restored it. The word that became flesh was not the end of commandments, but the fulfillment of their rhythm. The Ethiopians preserved this vision when the rest of Christendom turned its face away. The Church of Rome, meanwhile, found peace in omission. By removing the book, it simplified faith into obedience through belief alone. The complexity of heavenly law vanished behind the veil of mystery. The temples of angels and cycles of divine order were forgotten, replaced by creeds that required no understanding of cosmic architecture. Simplicity triumphed. But beneath that simplicity, something essential was lost, the sense that faith was not sentiment but science, not emotion but alignment with the laws of creation. The suppression of Jubilees marked a shift in spiritual authority. Knowledge became the enemy of faith. The Church guarded power through ignorance, insisting that divine truth was too dangerous for the masses. What the scribes of Qumran had written to preserve understanding, the bishops of Rome buried to preserve control. The Book of Jubilees did not vanish because it was false. It vanished because it made men question who decides what is holy. In time, generations forgot that Moses had seen two revelations. They remembered only the stone, never the light. They saw commandments as burdens, not blueprints. The cosmic calendar, the law of vibration, the secret of angels, all vanished into dust. The Church rose on foundations of selective memory, building cathedrals of doctrine upon fragments of truth. And the people worshipped what they were allowed to remember. But heaven forgets nothing. What is buried in silence returns in season. That is why, in distant lands, in forgotten monasteries, the Book of Jubilees endured. It waited for an age when mankind would again hunger for origins, when faith would seek depth, when science would rediscover the laws of vibration the prophets once described as commandments. For every truth denied by one generation reemerges in another, clothed in new language but carrying the same light. Thus, the rejection of Jubilees became prophecy fulfilled. For it had said that men would forget the second revelation until the time appointed, when confusion would rule faith and men would worship shadow instead of light. That time has come again. The world debates law and freedom, order and chaos, as though they are enemies. But the Book of Jubilees whispers still through time. The universe itself is law, and grace is the rhythm that keeps it alive. The Church silenced the book, but not the truth it carried. Every time a soul seeks harmony between spirit and matter, between will and wisdom, the hidden revelation breathes again. The first revelation carved commandments for hands to obey. The second, engraved laws for hearts to remember. Both came from the same mountain. Both are still speaking. The question is not whether the Church was right or wrong. The question is whether we still have ears to hear the second voice, the whisper of the light Moses could not speak, but only carry in his eyes. I have seen what silence does to truth. It does not destroy it. It buries it alive. The Book of Jubilees was never lost. It was entombed, hidden beneath centuries of fear and doctrine, waiting for hearts brave enough to open its grave. I know this because I have touched its current in vision. It moves beneath the surface of every faith, a secret river connecting Eden to Sinai, Sinai to Calvary, Calvary to now. Those who erased it did not end it. They only made it sacred again, for the forbidden always carries power, and what the Church silenced, heaven preserved. In the Spirit I walked through time and saw the trail of those who still guarded the book. I saw monks in Ethiopia reading it by candlelight, whispering the names of angels that Rome had forbidden. I saw them holding its pages beside Genesis and Matthew as though no contradiction existed. They believed that law and grace were not opposites but reflections of one truth, the rhythm of obedience and mercy dancing within creation. They read the story of Abraham learning Hebrew from the angels, and they wept, because they felt the breath of that same language within their prayers. For them, Jubilees was not heresy, it was inheritance. When I looked westward, I saw churches built on marble and pride. Their altars gleamed, their choirs sang, but their scriptures were amputated. They preached salvation without structure, grace without geometry, faith without knowledge. They had forgotten that divine freedom cannot exist without divine order. They feared complexity, for complexity cannot be controlled. Simplicity is easier to rule. And so they closed the canon and declared it complete. But I tell you, revelation is never finished. The heavens still speak. The tablets of light have never stopped shining. Only our eyes have dimmed. The book of Jubilees survived because truth has its own guardians. When one nation buries it, another preserves it. When one priest denies it, a prophet dreams it again. That is the law of the Spirit. It cannot be confined to institution or erased by decree. Each age receives what it is ready to remember, and now the age of remembering has begun. For the same vibrations that shaped the world are stirring again. The secrets Moses heard are no longer content to remain silent. In trance I heard the voice that spoke to him. It said, I gave you 2 revelations, one to govern flesh, one to awaken spirit. The first you carved in stone, the second you sealed in your heart. Both will return when man learns that faith and knowledge are one. That voice still speaks through every forgotten scripture, through every mystery rediscovered, through every soul that seeks order in chaos. The book of Jubilees is not only a text, it is a memory encoded in the soul of creation. When the world forgets, it reemerges, as if creation itself cannot bear to be misunderstood any longer. I have watched men fear this book because it demands responsibility. It tells us that our actions are not private, that every word, every thought alters the balance of heaven and earth. It reveals that sin distorts reality, not because God is wrathful, but because law is woven into being itself. You cannot defy it without consequence. The church preferred a simpler story, a God who forgives endlessly, a faith without structure. But freedom without law is not freedom. It is dissolution. Jubilees reminds us that grace is not escape. It is alignment restored. When I read its words, I felt the universe vibrate in agreement. I understood that the law is not chains, but scaffolding. It holds up the temple of the soul. Without it, the roof collapses and spirit falls into confusion. That is why the book was called dangerous, because it awakens memory. It tells man that the divine is not distant, not arbitrary. It is mathematical, rhythmic, exact. The same law that keeps stars in orbit governs the human heart. Obey it, and you move in harmony. Resist it, and you fracture the design. As I walked through the ruins of old faiths in vision, I saw priests arguing over words while angels watched in sorrow. The angels remembered the original law, the pattern Moses saw when the cloud descended. They remembered the rhythm that guided creation, the balance of light and shadow, day and rest, birth and death. They have not ceased their work. They still record, still guard, still whisper. And I saw their lament, for men no longer listen. Religion has replaced revelation. Doctrine has replaced vibration. Yet even in our noise, the divine pulse beats beneath everything, calling the soul back to its source. I understood then that every rediscovery of lost scripture is not accident but appointment. The book of Jubilees resurfaced because the world had again lost balance. Time had fractured. Men had turned holy days into festivals and faith into entertainment. The soul was weary of noise and hungered for pattern again. The book returned not to divide, but to restore proportion, to remind us that holiness is harmony, that truth is not opinion, but resonance. Many who read it will not understand. They will see myth where there is code, superstition where there is law. But to those whose spirits are awake, it will sound familiar, as if they have read it before in dreams. For every soul carries within it the memory of that mountain, the moment Moses stood between thunder and silence and received both revelation and restraint. That moment lives in us. The book of Jubilees only uncovers what has always been written inside the human spirit, the record of divine order, etched into light before birth. I do not speak to defend the book, for truth defends itself. I speak to remind those who seek. Nothing that reveals divine pattern is ever truly forgotten. It sleeps, it waits, it returns when the time of remembering arrives. The scribes of Qumran guarded it with their lives. The monks of Ethiopia kept it when the empires burned. And now it rises again, whispering to those who can hear. Creation still has rhythm, and every soul is a note in its song. When you feel dissonance within, when life feels broken and time feels lost, listen. The law still hums beneath the chaos. The same voice that spoke through Moses, through Abraham, through Jubilees, still speaks through you. For the forbidden book was never just history, it was prophecy. It told of a time when humanity would rediscover that the laws of heaven are not dead commandments, but living frequencies calling us home. That time is now. And I, as witness, can only say what I have seen. Truth returns in waves, and each wave carries light enough to awaken the world again. Truth does not vanish when silenced. It transforms, it hides in symbols. It moves beneath history like fire under ash, waiting for breath to awaken it again. The book of Jubilees is one such fire. It was buried under centuries of doctrine, yet its embers never cooled. When I entered its current through vision, I felt it burning still beneath the ruins of theology. Its heat was not destruction, but remembrance. For every truth once hidden becomes light again when the world grows dark enough to need it. That is the law of revelation, the rhythm of divine recurrence. What men call forbidden, heaven calls unfinished. The silence of the church could not erase the echo of the angels. Their words, sealed within Jubilees, continued to pulse through creation. Even those who never read the book have felt its influence, for its principles live in the structure of reality itself. Every time a soul hungers for order in a world of confusion, every time conscience awakens and demands harmony, that is Jubilees whispering through memory. The book is not merely scripture. It is the mirror of creation's own memory, reflecting how divine law still governs chaos, unseen but absolute. In trance, I saw that this book reappears whenever the world forgets the rhythm of heaven. It rose first when Israel's faith was corrupted by philosophy, when the priests argued about calendars instead of holiness. It returned again when Rome conquered faith with empire, when the church traded revelation for hierarchy. And it rises now, in our time, when knowledge has replaced wisdom and humanity calls itself free while drowning in disorder. The pattern repeats because humanity repeats its mistakes. Each age forgets that grace cannot thrive without law, that spirit cannot rise without structure, that freedom without discipline is decay. The book of Jubilees speaks not to enslave, but to remind. It reveals that the same laws binding stars in orbit also bind the heart in peace. When a man sins, he does not offend a deity, he dislocates himself from the pattern of existence. When a nation abandons justice, it does not merely fail morally, it fractures cosmic equilibrium. That is why history moves in cycles of rise and ruin. Every empire that forgets divine rhythm collapses, for even civilizations obey the same laws as souls. Order sustains. Disorder devours. This is not punishment. It is consequence. As I beheld this truth, I felt grief for mankind. We build towers like Babel, believing we can ascend through knowledge, but every tower leans when its foundation is lawless. We speak of progress, yet our progress moves in spirals, returning always to chaos because we refuse the simple harmony that once united heaven and earth. The book of Jubilees calls to that forgotten simplicity, not primitive but pure. It tells us that creation does not evolve through rebellion but through remembrance, by remembering the laws written into light before time began. In the silence of meditation, I heard the voice of the Eternal, the same voice that spoke to Moses and the scribes who wrote in trembling secrecy. It said, "Law is not command, it is communion. To live within it is not obedience, it is reunion." I understood then that law and grace are not enemies. They are breath and heartbeat, each meaningless without the other. Grace is the forgiveness that realigns. Law is the structure that keeps the alignment. Remove either, and creation collapses into noise. That is the true message the church feared. For such understanding leaves no room for control. A soul that knows divine order no longer needs rulers. I saw the hidden thread that connects Jubilees to every sacred text. It is the thread of cosmic responsibility. It teaches that every thought is architecture, every act a vibration shaping eternity. The angels revealed this to Moses, and the scribe who preserved it dared to write it down. That is why his hands trembled. He knew he was documenting the blueprint of existence. When the church silenced him, it silenced not a man, but an entire dimension of awareness. Yet heaven keeps its balance. What is denied in one realm appears in another. The same revelation now awakens through science, through quantum laws, through men discovering vibration and frequency as the fabric of reality. Words different, truth the same. The return of Jubilees is not revival of religion, but restoration of memory. Humanity is beginning to remember that creation is a system of living patterns, that thought itself is creative energy, that morality is not imposed but intrinsic to the mechanics of the soul. The ancients knew this. They called it holiness. We call it resonance. The language changes. The principle endures. The universe rewards alignment, not belief. That is why prayer without discipline is hollow, and faith without harmony produces noise. The law of heaven answers not to words, but to vibration. The scribes who hid the scrolls in desert caves did not do it for survival. They did it for us. They knew there would come a generation disillusioned with institutions, yet starving for meaning. They knew the book would rise again when the language of spirit and science could finally meet. I am telling you, that time has come. What Moses saw as flame upon stone, we now see as light within atom. The pattern is the same. The Creator's voice still hums through matter, and those who listen not with ear but with soul can still hear the rhythm of eternity, moving beneath every breath. The church may have sealed the canon, but heaven never closed its mouth. Revelation continues, wave after wave, as each age becomes ready for more. The book of Jubilees was not excluded because it was false, but because it was too vast, too infinite, too demanding for men who sought control over mystery. Yet, truth has its own patience. It returns when the world grows, ready to bear it again. Now the veil thins. The patterns once hidden are returning in dream, in discovery, in the language of light itself. And so, I say this, do not fear the rediscovered truths. They do not compete with faith, they complete it. The law was never meant to chain the heart, but to steady it. The same commandments written in ancient stone are written within your own soul. The book of Jubilees is not merely history recovered. It is prophecy fulfilled. It returns to call humanity back to the divine pattern, to remind every soul that creation is not over. It is still unfolding, still being spoken, still waiting for man to remember his place in the symphony of God. When that remembering spreads, heaven and earth will no longer be separate. Time will align again, and the forgotten language will be heard once more, not as command, but as chorus, the voice of every soul singing in tune with the one who first spoke light into being. Every revelation that has ever reached the earth was not given to change God's truth, but to awaken man's memory of it. The book of Jubilees was not written to replace the Bible, but to remind us of the pieces that our fear erased. In silence, I have seen how the two revelations still move together, the stone that teaches obedience and the light that teaches understanding. One shapes the hands, the other opens the eyes. Without both, humanity walks half awake, building temples to shadows, calling them truth. I have learned that revelation never ends. It only changes form, appearing in visions, in science, in the quiet, knowing that moves through the heart when it is still. What Moses saw in thunder, we now glimpse in the rhythm of atoms, in the order of stars, and the pulse that holds galaxies in their dance. The law of creation was not written only for priests. It was written into every soul. That is why the soul aches when it strays from harmony. That pain is memory. That hunger is the echo of Eden calling us home. The book of Jubilees revealed that creation itself is covenant. The sun keeps it by shining, the earth keeps it by turning, the angels keep it by serving, and man, made of both dust and light, must keep it by remembering. We were not made to invent truth, but to reflect it. Sin was never rebellion alone, it was forgetfulness. Salvation is remembering what was always true. That is why God allowed 1/10 of darkness to remain, to test whether light can remember itself even within shadow. Now the silence of ages is breaking. The same voice that spoke to Moses still speaks, not through thunder, but through the quiet certainty within the Spirit. It whispers, "Be still and recall who you are." For each soul carries a spark of the first word, the sound that once created everything. When we speak in truth, we vibrate with that same power. When we act in love, we restore the symmetry that keeps worlds from falling apart. The law is not prison. It is the architecture of eternity, the sacred geometry of being. I have seen the end, and it is not destruction. It is restoration. The fragments will return to the whole. The lost language will rise again, not through tongue, but through resonance. When humanity remembers the rhythm of the divine, time will align. The days will return to their proper count. The heart will find its Sabbath. Creation will rest, not in silence, but in harmony. I leave these words not as doctrine, but as witness. I have seen that truth cannot die, it only sleeps. The book of Jubilees has awakened because we are ready to hear what was once too heavy for the world. The angels still record, the heavens still breathe, the covenant still holds. And I, a traveler through vision and memory, testify that the story is not finished. The light that spoke in the beginning still speaks now, calling each soul by the same command. It spoke to the void. Let there be light, and let it never be forgotten again.